Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento, and I'm not the only New Englander in today's episode because I'm joined by a guest who already has me so fired up about the energy that he brings, and the work that he focuses on is something really special that applies to all of us as entrepreneurs. We're going to learn so much from today's guest, so let me tell you all about him. His name is Jake Stahl. Jake is where innovation and mind science meet, transforming the landscape of training, skill building, and customer service. Specializing in converting the chaos of training into a strategic learning initiative, he's trained over 10,000 professionals across 6 countries and crafted over 100 proprietary courses. His approach is in marrying value-based selling with the latest research in the psychology of communication through his unique adaptive conversational blueprint. That's going to be the focus of so much of what we talk about today. I personally can't wait to dive into that stuff. With a proven history of significantly boosting sales, shaping top-tier sales and customer operations teams, and leaving a lasting impact across a diverse range of 10 industries, Jake stands as a transformative figure in the field. His 7 patents, what a feat there, 7 patents in field force technology, along with the International Gold Award for Instructional Design, highlight his commitment to continually raising the bar in the industry. His ultimate goal is to allow companies to have the perfect conversation with their customers. I'm so excited about this. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Jake Stahl. All right, Jake, you've got so much to live up to today, but welcome to the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast.
Well, thank you, Brian. It is a true honor to be here. I can't thank you enough.
Heck yeah, no, I'm so excited. I always love giving you the stage first, take listeners beyond the bio, give them that overview, the short story of who the heck is Jake? How did you end up doing all these amazing things that you're up to?
Well, thank you. My name is Jake. Obviously, I kind of developed all this out of a sense of frustration. I listened to a lot of people in sales, and I experienced plenty of crushing defeats in sales, and I thought there just had to be a better way. So when I started to get into training and development, my main focus was on the psychology of the way people make decisions and why they make the decisions the way they do. It's been a 30-year journey across 6 different countries and all across the United States. And through my learnings and everything I've done, I've come up with the adaptive conversational blueprint, which is a way to kind of break the conditioning of the way people normally think. And just to give you an example, every day we walk by somebody or we talk to somebody, and the first thing we say is, "Hey, how are you?" Most of the time people don't mean it. It's just a greeting, but our reactions are preconditioned. "I'm fine. I'm good." And my fascination became, how do we break that conditioning? How do we get people to really say how they are? Or how do we ask a question or make a statement that's going to get a genuine interaction from literally the first second you talk to somebody? So all of that has led me to where I am today.
Jake, what an overview. I feel like it leads us, you know exactly how to do this conversationally. You led us right to a cliff where we're just like, give us those secrets. And I don't know if it's one secret. I would imagine it's more of a framework that you've developed along the way, but walk us through that, because adaptive conversational blueprint, it's a very fancy technical word that might be scary for some people, but walk us through how we actually start doing that. Because I'm sure this is a pain that obviously this was born out of your own pains and experiences in this, but as entrepreneurs, we all feel that pain every day. So where do we even start having that conversation?
Sure. And I talk to entrepreneurs a lot, especially fractional executives, because I offer myself as a fractional chief learning officer out to companies. One of the things I hear all the time is, how do I sell myself, or how do I sell my business? And part of the adaptive conversational blueprint is first understanding the perception that people have of you when you speak to them. Do they think you're a salesperson? Do they think you're selling a product? Do they think you're genuine? And part of that then is, once you understand the perception, is doing what I call digging 3 layers deep. And here's an example. Let's say you're selling a weight loss product. Nobody on the history of the planet has ever wanted to just lose weight. They've wanted to look better for their significant other. They've wanted to fit in college blue jeans. They've wanted to spare their knees because maybe they've gotten too heavy, but nobody has ever just wanted to lose weight. So the adaptive conversational blueprint first looks at the perception of what you sell, how it's perceived in the marketplace, and then we develop a value statement around that. But Brian, the important thing to remember, I hate sales scripts. People who use a sales script, you can hear it, you know it's not genuine. So instead of teaching people a sales script, I teach people how to have the perfect conversation with somebody.
Yes, you are preaching to the choir here. I think that's why listeners love this show so much, is because they all know there are no pre-planned questions here on this show. You and I are just rolling with the flow. And I think that that's an essential ingredient in sales, of course, because if I came here just thinking, oh, I need to ask Jake this and that, we're going to miss out on so much of your genius. Just like in sales, I'd miss out on so many of your insights. But it begs the natural question, Jake, of how the heck do I have the perfect conversation if I don't know what to ask? I also, remember, we're only half the equation. I also don't know what they're going to say. So where do I take it? How do I guide it if I'm the leader of the sales process? Or am I the leader? I guess that's a side question. Where do we even start in having that perfect conversation?
Well, it's fun you ask that because we don't lead. The process I teach, like when I go to talk to a company, I don't ever sell me or what I do. I sell our relationship. So I will get into a conversation with a company for 5 or 10 minutes and they'll say, okay, tell me what you do. And I say, well, this is it. I teach you how to bond quickly and easily. Brian, when we go into a sales conversation, we're always preoccupied with how do I sell my product? How do I fit that in? The reality is we should be more focused on building a bond with somebody. So we should be focused on getting that person to open up. And what you find is, and this is the big surprise for everybody I've coached over the years, what you find is the conversation guides itself. If I have you interested in me and I'm sincerely interested in you, eventually the question's going to come up. So what do you got for me? So what are you calling about today? But by the time the customer gets to that point, they're bought into the conversation and you're bought into them. You said earlier, how did this come about? There was a psychologist named B.F. Skinner years ago in Freud's age, and his theory was there is no such thing as free will. His whole concept was that we are all a preconditioned set of responses. Responses that have worked well for us in the past are going to continue to work well for us. So if I call somebody to promote myself or my business, the phone rings and the preconditioning starts. Brian, how often do you get a phone call where you look at the screen and you immediately judge how the conversation is going to go based on who's calling you?
Yeah, it's true. It's something, I mean, especially in today's world where my iPhone even says spam likely.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So we talk about how to break that conditioning entirely, how to get somebody to respond well to your phone call. Because salespeople are in a weird spot. We have conditioned the public to say, just looking, not interested, what's the price tag? We did that to ourselves. So now it's high time we start breaking that conditioning and starting to become the true professionals we are, wanting to sell a valuable product to a valuable customer. And the adaptive conversational blueprint is how you do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like you're exposing all of us because without even realizing it, you stole the words that I say. Anytime I walk into a store in person, I don't care what store it is, even if I'm on a mission and a store employee says, what can I help you with? Even if I really need help, Jake, I will say, oh, no, I'm good. I'm just looking. And I don't know if part of that is just the way that we are as men, but also I think that it is part of that is let me figure it out for myself. I have these walls up with them, even though they're coming from a place of service. That's what's fascinating to me as you're talking about this stuff out loud is why are we as consumers or potential clients or whoever it is that we're talking to rejecting a place of service? And what I'm hearing from you is it is that preconditioning. Talk to us about some of those elements of preconditioning, because this is just one of those, that barrier, that wall that we naturally put up. What other sorts of preconditioning are we doing or are we facing in growing our businesses that we're probably not even realizing?
Well, when it comes to being a salesperson, we always think about who we perceive as the bad salespeople. And by bringing up these topics, I'm not implying anything. I sold cars for a while, but I know the impression people have of car salesmen. I sold pharmaceuticals for a while. I know the impression people have of pharmaceutical salespeople. But again, we kind of did it to ourselves. When we come into a process and we introduce ourselves and start to sell immediately, the barriers go up. And it's to no fault of the customer. As a matter of fact, they're doing what's always worked. They've gotten defensive or they put barriers up, and that's okay. But the real question is, how do we break them down? And part of that is breaking the cycle. So if I'm doing a cold call to a customer and they pick up the phone, the worst thing I can do is say, "Hey, it's Jake, how are you?" That automatically puts the walls up. So an alternative may be, "Hey, listen, I'm really sorry. This is a cold call. My name is Jake, but if you give me 2 minutes, I may be able to help you out." By doing that, you're breaking that conditioning. You're throwing a loop in that they've never had before, and they're forced to process. So when I teach my process, Brian, I don't teach myself as like I'm a challenger sale or I'm a value-based selling sale. I don't have a methodology. What I do enhances that methodology. I teach people how to have that conversation.
Yeah, I like that, especially as a natural conversationalist. I love talking. And Jake, I can already tell you're similar to me in this regard. Listeners didn't hear us before we hit record, but we probably could have talked all day without hitting record. Agreed. And I wonder how many listeners are thinking, Jake, are you talking about small talk? Is that what we're really getting into? Is that the bridge between getting to know or meeting someone and getting to know them and having them be more receptive towards me? I think back to when you and I immediately first connected. Like, I love geography. I love places. I love traveling. I always ask people, I'm like, where in the world are you? And for you and I, we connected on a New England basis. And so I wonder how much of this you view as, what's the difference between the right approach in sales versus, are we talking about, introverts are probably dreading this, like, do we need a degree of small talk? Where does it fall into all of that?
I think part of it is just genuinely being interested. The best example I can give, Brian, is think about how we are as 5 and 6 year olds, or if you've watched a 5 and 6 year old, the conversation is so natural. I'm 5. How old are you? That's my mom. Which one is your mom? It's a conversation that the kids don't even think about it. It's just natural. It's inquisitive. It's the ability to just connect. So the part I get a little afraid of when people say, how do we do it? Is there's no defined way to do it. I can give you rules of thumb and we can talk about how to talk to somebody else. But as soon as I start to put a thought in of this is how you do it, people get into a box. And a very good friend of mine says it's hard to read the label when you're already inside the jar. So one thing I try to do when I do this teaching is we talk about what that jar even looks like. And we start to talk about how people have conversations. It's not that we don't know how, Brian. We do that every day. We talk to their parents, talk to our friends, our significant others, our kids, relatives. So it's not that we don't know how to do it. It's that we shift the way we do it when we're selling ourselves or when we're selling in a business. And let me put this in another way. We think about sales and business in a much different way. In sales, we say we're going to close 1 out of every 100 people because that's the percentage. It's a numbers game. And we're going to sell 1 out of every 500 people on the big ticket item. But we don't think about anything else in our life like that. I don't think I'm going to make a new friend today, so I have to run into a crowd of 100 people to pick one. And I don't think to myself, well, finding my soulmate is a $1 in a $1 million deal, so I have to date 1 million people to get to my soulmate. I just do it. So my process is getting you into the sales conversation to not think about a numbers game, but to think about just how do you shift to your normal conversation in a sales call. And the miracle that happens, Brian, is when people do this and they get the concept, their sales open way up. I've 3x'd companies with their sales. I've increased their customer service stars by 1.5 stars. It's not hard. It's just that we've almost forgotten how to do it.
Yeah, I for sure agree with you on that. And I especially think it's because something you said in there about basically you don't want to put people in a box. To me, the arch nemesis of what has made sales so ugly over the years is I always call it copy paste. A lot of entrepreneurs that I've worked with, they're just like, oh, show me an example of your cold email outreach, for example. And Jake, I've come to dread when people ask me for them to see an example of something I've done, because guess what they will inevitably do? Copy and paste.
Yeah.
And it kills me because then they sound like me. It may or may not, probably not apply to their business, their service, the people that they're reaching out to. So I do think that it's those boxes that are so difficult. And once you're in them, it's hard to get out of those boxes. Even when I split test for ad campaigns, it's hard for me to write a second headline that doesn't sound exactly like the first headline. I have to walk away.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Go ahead. Do you want to add something to that?
Well, and think about just a step further. Brian, you've lived in LA and now you live in Florida and you lived in New England. You know just by your nature that the talk isn't the same. If you put a Southerner in New York City, they're going to drown because New York City's just going to talk over them and get crazy. And you put a New Yorker down in South Carolina and the South Carolinians are going to think, man, he just talks way too fast and way too much. So it even gets deeper that we need to talk other people's language. And although this sounds complicated, it's remarkably simple with the ways that I teach.
Yeah, I love that. It's so true. I even found after a year of living in LA, when I would come back to Boston, my Boston friends were like, dude, you sound like a Californian now. Because you're right. It is entirely different. And that's, again, this is like the anti-copy paste part of our episode. And I'm all about it, Jake. With that in mind, though, I'm just naturally thinking, I love being the host because I just think of what listeners are probably being like, Jake, here's my objective. And I think one of those would be, well, Jake, that's cool. I get it if I start talking to somebody and I'm in that sort of sales conversation, but eventually I need to sell to them. How do I transition? How do you go from a great conversation to, at the end of the day, I've got to ask them for their 16 credit card digits or ask them for a check? What's that transition look like? Because when we talk about the conversation, it's one, it's not just the opening. Two, it may not just be the end. It's an ongoing thing. How do we navigate that landscape?
So part of it is it doesn't have to be a super smooth transition. A lot of people really feel like they need to plan their call out. And it can be as simple as, you know what, Brian, we just spent a couple of minutes together. I love the fact that you moved around. My guess is you're probably wondering why I've called. So it can be just a real simple transition. The danger comes in what you just said a couple of minutes ago, in that you get a sales script that's cut and pasted and it gets very impersonal. And I think we're really fooling ourselves if we think that the person on the other end of the phone doesn't realize this. I get notices on LinkedIn all the time that, hey, Jake, I saw this, or I saw your website. I got 32 messages in the past 6 months that somebody saw my website. I didn't have a website. So we really get into this. Let's blanket 1,000 people and hope it works. But then in the call, we also try to map that out too much when the transitions can be just super simple. We've talked for a while. Just curious, what are you doing about so-and-so? Or I guess you're wondering why I've called, so let's just quick talk about so-and-so. So the transition can be smooth, or it can be abrupt. Either way, since you built a relationship, it just doesn't matter at that point.
Yes, I'm so glad. That is such poignant advice that I want to point out for listeners, because that truly has served me in all of life, not just business. But when people hang out with me in real life, Jake, I'm sure you're like this as well. We just inevitably end up talking to strangers, and it's because we don't think there needs to be like, oh gosh, not to talk about dating on the air, but when people want to use pickup lines, I cringe, because to me, it's copied and pasted rather than adaptive to the situation. I've always loved Seinfeld for the very clear reason that Jerry Seinfeld makes humor purely observational. If he sees something when he's walking down the street, he'll just talk about it. Whether there's a smooth transition or, as you say, it can be as abrupt as you need it or want it to be. So I really love that you give us that freedom to not live inside that box. It doesn't have to be pretty. Just call it out for what it is. I always say that things are only as awkward as we let them be. If you call it out, something's not awkward anymore. So I love those insights, Jake. I want to transition a little bit, because for you as a fractional chief learning officer, a lot of entrepreneurs are going to be listening to this saying, learning, where do I become? What is a strategic learning powerhouse? Talk to us about that aspect.
So the fractionals are really a new wave. And it's funny because I just heard fractional for the first time a couple of months ago. And I remember going downstairs and saying to my wife, apparently I'm fractional. But the fractional role is really hiring somebody to come into your company and do some work, but giving them the decision making and the ability to perform at the C-suite level. So they really get their hands in the muck, if you will. But the reason I'm a chief learning officer fractionally is because a lot of companies, smaller companies, startups, all of their focus is in generating revenue, as well it should be. And they want to spend their money on a strong chief revenue officer and a strong chief operating officer. And I get it. But you don't have to spend money on a training department to have a strong training program. So instead of asking you to take me on as a full-time person and pay me benefits and all the extra stuff that goes with it, why not just bring me on for as much as you need me? Let me create a learning program for you, something that's sustainable, and let me build an onboarding program that will grow with your company, and it'll grow exponentially as you leave it, as you need it to. The nice thing about being a chief learning officer is that I've learned from experience over the years that the training department is the last to get budget and it's the first to get cut. Well, being a fractional chief learning officer, I eliminate that concern for you. I come in, I serve you as you need me, and then I work myself out of a job.
Yeah, I like that overview. And that really should be the goal when we hire service providers is we should get the benefits from it without having those handcuffs forever and ever and ever. So I really love that you openly admit that and that's your approach to it. I want to ask you about learning in particular, though, because obviously for us as business owners, we correct things as they come up, Jake, and it's something that we're constantly faced about. But I know a core part of your work is you call it proactive, impactful learning. How do we proactively attack these things? What are the focus areas? What are the things that we have blinders on until we can't have those blinders anymore because something happened? What are some of those areas that you focus on?
Well, one of the things I do when I talk to clients is I try to figure out what they look like right before they need what I have to offer. And so I focus on people who are growing but are starting to slow, or people that are growing to the point where they need an onboarding program because they had managers training their new hires and the managers just don't have time anymore. So proactively dealing with this is creating those programs before they're really needed. There is an inevitable point in any organization's history, and that's where the enthusiasm of the new product rams headfirst into the objections offered by the public. And when that happens, you get a demotivation of the salespeople and you get an inevitable slowing down of selling. Proactively dealing with this is working with the CRO or working with the CEO or working with any number of people that are in charge of revenue or the growth of the company and allowing them to talk to me about what they want to see 5 years down the line. And with training and learning, it's important you tackle that ahead of time. Training should never be a just-in-time thing. It should always be a preemptive strike. Leadership development, cold call selling, long-term relationship building. But the hard part of that is people don't want to invest the money on that type of preemptive strike. As a fractional, you don't have to keep that as a long-term piece of the debit column, so to speak. You can have that as something that we come in, proactively do things, and then we try to help you see the future. And part of that, Brian, when I get hired by a company, I love to call up their customer service and just see how I'm handled when I call customer service. It's a great way to proactively deal with any problems that you see.
Yeah, that's a really good exercise. I've actually never heard anyone say that that's an approach, but that's the most effective approach. That's real life. Forget what managers tell you is they think is happening in their businesses. You're figuring out what's really happening. What are some of those things you've seen? Where are some of the areas that companies are dropping the ball by not proactively educating, learning, and training their employees?
I'll give you a great example. I don't want to mention any names, but I was just working with a company where I was trying to buy one of their products and I was trying to buy it from them online. So we had a chat session going. And after they sold me the product, I noticed there was a distinct change of phrasing. And I could tell an AI bot had taken over. So I just typed in the chat, hey, listen, where's so-and-so? And I asked where the sales rep was. And they're like, he's stepped away, so I'm going to be taking over now. So I think part of what we're losing, and a big place that people really need to consider, is that in this world of sales automation and AI, it's got a purpose. And boy, am I supportive of that purpose. But we're also in an age where customer service is dying in a big way, and people want to be handheld. So one of the areas I find a lot of times is that we try to switch over to automation too quickly, and you haven't really done the hand-holding you need to do to get them comfortable enough to switch them over. The second piece is, a lot of times with a sales organization, they will call you once a year for contract renewal. And in the meantime, they never hear from you. So again, this goes to reinforce that whole salesmen are ugly thing, because all they want to do is sell me stuff. So one thing I encourage companies to do, and I work with them to do, is to up their customer service, to keep touching base throughout the year, and to be able to just check in. Even if the customer says, I'm fine, leave me alone, they had a personal contact. So by the time the salesperson reaches out again, when it's time for contract renewal, they're like, oh, I hear from you guys regularly, you take good care of me, and this isn't the only time I hear from you. So those are two areas that I'm seeing a lot with clients that I'm working with.
Yeah, really good real life examples from you that we can all take action on. I think no matter what your business size is, that's phenomenal advice to not leave your customers alone. We had an episode recently where we talked about don't ghost your customers. It's funny how attentive we are during the sales process. And then once they're a customer, now we can ghost them. So yeah, definitely have felt that as a customer, and it's an important strategy for us as business owners. Jake, I do want to ask you a little bit more about AI and the role of that, because it's never been easier than before to learn things, to educate ourselves, to automate things. You've brought up so many different aspects. How's that changing the type of work that you're doing and the way that you work with companies?
Well, it's changing things in good and maybe not so great ways. One of the ways it's changing it for the good is that AI has a great way of phrasing things and coming up with ideas you may not have had before. So when it comes to training your individuals, or when it comes to coming up with sales processes, I found that AI is great. It's also great for finding customers in certain demographics and being able to create emails to send out to them. It's not unusual for somebody to take AI and say, I want to reach out to this customer, create 5 email messages for me subsequently based on the fact that they don't follow up. So AI can really be a great service to us, as can sales automation, especially when it comes to tracking how much those customers respond to your messaging, or sending out auto emails where normally a person would do that. The place that is becoming almost a little bit of a drawback, though, Brian, is I find that the pendulum often swings drastically the other way. So we go from not using it all and not needing it to using it almost exclusively. And in the training arena, we see that a lot, because people went from using flip charts to teach classes to then using exclusively PowerPoint, even to the point where training was considered, if you can read from a PowerPoint in front of a class, you've trained people. And you really haven't. You need to have that mix of personal touch along with that PowerPoint, or the personal touch along with sales automation, in order to give your customer that strong personal feel.
Yeah, I love that overview, especially, gosh, my mom has said ever since I was a young kid, everything in moderation. And I think it's such an important lesson for all of us, because you're right, it's easy. Whether we're talking phone scripts, whether we're talking use of PowerPoints, guilty as someone who previously created online courses, you're right, everything in moderation, just like AI. The tools are becoming more and more abundant, but everything in moderation. So I love that perspective. Jake, there's so much that we could go into. I can't believe time is flying by in this episode. I want to ask you, because something that really caught my eye is your book, The 2-10 Rule. Talk to me about that. What is the 2-10 Rule?
Well, the 2-10 Rule, it's actually coming out as a chapter in a book towards the end of November. And then I'm writing a book about it that will be coming out in May. The 2-10 Rule is simple, Brian. You had asked me earlier about how you evolve a conversation and how you get people interested in your product and how you transition to that. The 2-10 Rule is a simple concept. Instead of worrying about the content of a sales message, you worry about the cadence of a message. So I grew up in Pennsylvania Dutch country. And one saying we had was the brain can only take what the butt can endure. So your brain is constantly in motion. A good example is when you're driving down the highway and you realize you passed 5 exits and you're not sure how you got to that stage. Your brain goes into kind of a screensaver mode. So the 2-10 rule, most basic principle of it is every 2 minutes when you're talking to someone, create an interaction. So you check in and you ask a question, or you even start another complete conversation. And then every 10 minutes, you kind of do a sum up or a roundup. So if I were teaching a class, it might sound like, okay, I've just blabbed for 10 whole minutes. Let's just stop. Does anybody have any questions about what we've just discussed? And what people find when they do the 2-10 rule in the conversation is not only do they control it a lot more, but it gives them conscious time to reflect on what was said and not worry about, I have to jump in, or, I have to cut that person off to get my thought in. So the 2-10 rule talks strictly about cadence, not about content. And when you get a cadence going with people, like we did when we were 5, the conversations get richer and deeper. I've even helped people do this in their personal conversations, and they found that their relationship with their significant others have deepened dramatically because now their focus is on the person talking. And when that happens, that person feels good, and they attribute that feel good to you. So it actually builds the conversation between you and a client, or between you and a class, or between you and a friend. But yeah, it's all about cadence.
Yeah, I love that, especially because you called it out right there, which is why I'm so passionate about the content we get to put out here on this podcast, is because all this stuff we're talking about, sure, it'll help you in your sales, but it's also going to help you in your relationships with your customers, your relationships in real life, your own personal development. It really touches on all of these arenas. So Jake, you're so generous with sharing all of these insights. And it's also, you did give me the most natural of segues ever, because now I get to give you the hardest part, which is to somehow sum up all this stuff. We talked about so many things here today. We talked about the perfect conversation. We talked about sales. We talked about proactive learning inside of our companies and with our employees. We talked about psychological triggers, so much, Jake. But for listeners who are sitting there going, gosh, I've got work to do. I've never thought about this stuff this intentionally. What's the action that you want every listener to take from here?
I think the thing I would encourage you to do is ask 3 whys. So when a customer says they need this or they're looking for that, instead of just launching into what your product does, ask why. So here's an example. Let's go back to the weight loss thing. So, you know what, Jake, I really want to lose weight. Okay, why do you want to lose weight? Well, it turns out that my doctor said that my heavy weight is affecting my knees. Okay, so your knees have been bothering you? Yeah, they really have. As a matter of fact, I can't get up after I played with my granddaughter for a while. Okay, so now we're at the root cause. You're not selling to weight loss, you're selling to playing with the granddaughter. So I would encourage you, when you're out there talking to a customer, talking to a client, ask the 3 whys and get into really deep what they want down below, not just on the surface. And what they want down below is often preconditioned about what they enjoy in life. Work with the preconditioning versus against it, and you're going to see your customer service scores go way up, and you're going to see your revenue soar.
Yes, Jake, that is incredible advice. It's super actionable. I almost feel like today in this episode, you've almost like peeled back the layers of the human brain and given us insights into these things, because so many of us, we've experienced both sides of this coin. I think every entrepreneur and entrepreneur has experienced both sides, where we do it ourselves when we interact with companies, when we interact with salespeople, when we interact with others, and also all of us. I'm going to make this disclaimer for everyone listening. Jake, myself, every single one of us, we're guilty of doing these things in our own businesses as well. Yep. So Jake, I love hearing your perspective on all of these, the real life examples that you have. I know that I'm personally super eager. When your books come out, sign me up to read them. And on that note, drop the links to your website, your LinkedIn, wherever you want listeners to go from here, because I know people are going to want to hear more of your thoughts, more of your perspectives and lessons on all of this.
Well, my LinkedIn, please go there. It's Jake Stahl, JakeStahl. And my website is jakestahlconsulting.com. And I also put out a newsletter on LinkedIn called Fresh from Jake's Mind Lab, where each week we look at a little change you can make in linguistics to have a huge impact on your customers and on your sales. And last but not least, please be on the lookout for my book next May. It'll be called The 210 Rule, The Guide to the Perfect Conversation.
Yes, listeners, you all know the drill. You do not have to look far to find all of those amazing resources. Jake, I'm going to be the first one from this specific episode to sign up for your newsletter because I'm going to do it way before this episode comes out. I invite every single listener, check the show notes wherever it is that you're tuning in, whether you're on Spotify or iTunes or on our website. Just scroll right on down. You'll find all of those links, including Jake's LinkedIn, as well as his LinkedIn newsletter, which I know that we're all going to want to sign up for. So Jake, on behalf of myself and the entire Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur community, thank you so much for joining us here today on the show and being so generous with all your knowledge.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It was a true pleasure.